and Mrs. Amalia Guerrero of New York. I speak a word of complete, and our mission discharged. We are not satisfied that it is enough to have answered factual questions or even to have fixed responsibility for the defects of planning and performance. In truth, the Attica Correctional Facility in September 1971 was not perceptibly better or worse than the other maximum security prisons in the state system. The Commission, without pretending special expertise on matters of penology and prison administration, nonetheless has concluded that it should add to its generally negative conclusions about the present prison system some more affirmative thoughts for the future. These views are outlined in the preface to the report, and they are further summarized in the press release that is available to you as of this date. Because they are lengthy, I will not summarize them now, although we, of course, will be glad to discuss them if you wish. I conclude then by saying that, faithfully, over the period to produce this report, we cannot emphasize strongly enough the necessity for general citizen involvement in the search for improvement in the prison system. Much of what needs to be done is not mysterious. Experts are in general agreement about many of the reforms, but they have never been able to get the attention of the public, without which these reforms will never be possible. It is accordingly our earnest hope that this report will be widely circulated and studied. Similarly, we hope that the televised report, which will soon be available not only for release tonight, but as well for educational programs, for civic groups and others who are interested in the prison system, will form the basis for careful study of this most urgent issue.
This year of study, or the amount of time studied by the Commission, study shown you that the public feels this way, that the public is willing to commit itself to the extent you believe necessary?
I think all present indications are that the public is not interested, and that's the very reason that we have sought to give every attention we can to this report. Not because we think our report is remarkable, but because we think that the problem is so acute that unless attention can be focused through this dramatic and tragic event upon the need for reform, then there will be no change, and change is crucial.
McKay, do you feel
Yes.
right now that there is the kind of repression, as the inmates called it then, the kind of repression in Attica prison that there was before the revolution last year?
Repression is not a word we used. We did describe the prison circumstances as dehumanizing and degrading in many respects, and much of that has been changed. There are small, perhaps not very large things that have been done, and others that can be done and I trust will be done. But the basic problems remains that the prisons do not rehabilitate, they do not educate, they do not prepare for return to society those who, on the average, will be there only less than 2 years.
Could there be another riot at Attica then? Could it recur at Attica?
There could be another difficulty in any institution in the country at the present time, so long as the system is not basically changed. I hope there will not be, and I am told by those who have been there recently that the atmosphere at Attica specifically is much more relaxed than it was a year ago.
Would you tell us about
As concerned with reform, as we were not.
Do you anticipate more changes in the coming session?
Yes, sir, I certainly hope so. The Jones Commission is recommending them, and I certainly hope that they will come about.
Priority list of what you'd like to see done?
That's not really our function. That has been carefully outlined by the Jones Commission in a series of very good reports, and they have more reports still to come out on probation and parole, at least.
You say that the
Yes,
public, by and large, has not been interested, has not gotten interested in prison reform. Do you think that prison officials and prison guards have been galvanized as a result of this Attica situation to a change toward what you would regard as a better system?
From what I understand of those who have been to Attica recently, the correction officers are beginning to have a somewhat different attitude. Remember, after all, their problem is the same as the inmates. They're locked in with the inmates a large proportion of each day. And if the prisons remain volatile, if there remains a risk of uprising and taking of hostages again, their problem is just as severe, indeed in some ways more severe than that of the inmates. So that our hope is that there will be a general understanding that all together, correction officers, prison officials, inmates, and the public as a whole must work towards solution of this.
Dealing with another incident like
Yes.
this occur, would you recommend the news blackout getting back to your comments on the media?
As to the use of lethal weapons were not really considered because the state used what weapons it had at hand. some of those weapons we thought were ill-suited to the particular attack that had to be made. And in addition, there was a failure of command. The instructions were clear that only state troopers should fire, but somehow that instruction did not filter down to all the correction officers, some of whom did in fact use their own weapons and fired with some loss of life.
Dean McKay, is it your sense that in the assault, what you call the indiscriminate firing by the troopers and in the involvement of the guards, was this a reaction to this immediate situation and the fact that there had been reports that guards had been slaughtered by the rebels, or was this part of the ongoing antagonism between law enforcement officers on that level and their feelings toward inmates?
I think it was probably a particular response to a particular situation, but remember, by the time the assault took place, attitudes had been particularly inflamed over that period of 4 days. The state officials, the prison officials, were aware of that, and for that reason we think they should have taken particular precautions to avoid against indiscriminate firing. And the instructions were okay, but they weren't really supervised or monitored effectively, and we criticized them for that.
What will be the effect on Attica itself? Mr. Lyman has called Mr. Fisher's betrayal, but understanding it's attempting to get at your files. Will this have an impact on the facility itself, people who are still inside?
The question, which not everyone may have heard, is whether the subpoena...
With the full knowledge of that statement to him, we proceeded to make representations to inmates and to correction officers and to state troopers that their confidences would be respected. And I agree with what Dean McKay said, that we will prevail on this issue.
Is there any indication that Judge Fisher is backing down on his demands?
I have not spoken.
Dean McKay, would you please summarize briefly what you feel are the best directions that could be taken in prison reform?
Well, it's in the full statement that was released this morning.
Which you did not read, which is why
Would you
I'm
like me to
asking
do that? Surely.
To present it, if you would, informally.
Hard to, as I suggested before, the commission thought that it wasn't enough to talk about what was wrong at Attica in particular and in general without giving some suggestion of whether there is any hope for the future. And so we wrestled long with the question of whether we might go beyond our real mission, which was fact-finding, to say something about what we thought should be guiding principles for prisons in general. And we have enunciated a series of 7 principles that we think are appropriate for the guidance of prison reform. Let me summarize those very briefly. First, if prisoners are to learn to bear the responsibilities of citizens, they must have all the rights of other citizens except those that have been specifically taken away by court order. In general, this means that prisoners should retain all rights except that of liberty of person. Second, the confinement associated with the deprivation of liberty of person should be the least that is administratively necessary to accomplish that result. If a serious attempt is to be made to prepare prisoners for their return to society, they must not be cut off from all contacts with that society until their time is served. The prisons must no longer be shrouded from public view and closed. The principal significance of this report, then, may well lie in the fact that it documents in considerable detail every aspect of prison life in the structure of a major American prison, based upon more precise information than has ever before been assembled about any single institution. Interviews with the vast majority of inmates, correction officers, and others involved in the daily life at Attica in September 1971 provide a unique opportunity to fix attention upon an entire institution at a particular instant of time. In capturing that moment, we have examined state rules and procedures, prison politics, the changing nature of the inmate population, festering racism, all a dangerously volatile mix. But the elements of replication are all around us.
Is it your feeling that within the foreseeable future, considering public thinking, public attitudes, there can be meaningful, productive change in the New York State's penal system?
It's perfectly apparent that change can come about. It's equally apparent that change will not come about unless the attention of the public focuses upon this issue. As I said, that there are changes that can be made. They're costly. They require effort. They require devotion. And none of that will happen unless the public gets itself interested enough to deal with the legislature, deal with the executive branch, and leave the prisons unneglected.
You criticized Governor Rockefeller for not going to the prison and meeting with the inmates. There was some criticism of Governor Rockefeller. Could you expand on that, please?
Surely, I'd like to preface it by saying in the first place that we did not think that was a central issue. There is no assurance that if Governor Rockefeller had gone, things would have come out a bit differently. We're sorry that the press has given it so much attention. That is not the central issue. The problem is the prisons. But we did conclude that in light of the urgency of the decision having to do with the risk of life and death for a number of New York State citizens, it was appropriate for the governor to be on hand to make a personal appraisal of the situation after he had been requested by Commissioner Oswald, his principal deputy, after he had been asked by all the observers to attend, and after at least one or more other members of his staff thought it might have been advisable. That is all we have said.